Hi, Jeffrey. It's good to see you. And
to be here with you.
It's great to see you. After all these years, we worked together in various formats and venues around the world. Today, though, Florida Grand Opera is preparing to sail into the new year of 2024 with a production of Leoncavallo's Pagliacci. And it's an amazing piece, and it's also an amazing fact that that was the first opera the company gave in its history. The company was incorporated in 1941 and then gave its first performance in 1942. It was at Miami Senior High School Auditorium, and the founder of the company, Arturo Di Filippi, who was a tenor, sang the lead role of Canio in that production.
Incredible.
Now, it's also curious to be mindful of the fact that the opera Pagliacci, which today is one of the most popular, frequently performed operas in the whole repertory, iconically famous as an opera, and certainly almost the definition of Italian verismo opera, it was only 48 years old in
Incredible.
1942. So it was a piece that a lot of people were still alive who had seen the world premiere in 1892, conducted by a young, vibrant Arturo Toscanini.
Right.
In the smaller house in Milan. It was not at La Scala, but it was an instant, immediate success and never, ever disappeared from the repertory. You know, some pieces are very popular and we don't see them for a long time.
Right.
And there'll be an important revival and everyone will be excited and start singing again. Never happened with Pagliacci. It has always stayed front and center as one of the great operas. And you're going to be the stage director for this production. Tell me what your biggest challenge is as you look at facing down an opera that is so iconic that almost everyone has seen at some point, that has been made into movies and films with the world's leading opera singers. What's the biggest challenge you think you face when you approach a work like this that you're going to bring to an audience?
You know, Justin, for me, I feel like so many of the pieces we do are iconic in certain ways. And so it's not a unique challenge to Pagliacci, it's a unique challenge to opera where we redo repertoire over and over again, where, you know, in the theater, it's not done it quite in the same way. And so my approach always is, let's get back to what the heart of the story is. Let's tell it through vibrant, fresh eyes and fresh storytelling. And let's make sure we are putting the emphasis on the voice and the music as a huge tool of storytelling in the way that audiences, whether they've seen the opera 5 or 6 times or it's their first time there, walk away with a uniquely impactful experience. So, you know, I take us back to as human a place as possible in each of these characters. The trap can be to lean into the caricatures of these people rather than really leaning into the humanity of them. And for me, when I really take the time to go back to text and really feel how Leoncavallo interpreted his own text as librettist on this, as he's the first one who really interpreted this text through the music, and find where these people really are in these relationships. Can I find vulnerability in Canio so that he's not just an abusive brute of a husband? Of course, Leoncavallo gives it to us. Mm-hmm. You know, that middle section in the No Pagliaccio Non Son is all about him expressing his generosity. He picked her up off the streets. Mm-hmm. He gave her a life, all of that. If you can keep that side of Canio in him all night long, and there's just these insecurities or whatever it is about these hot button issues for him that push him to violence, but you don't let him just be a violent man, mm-hmm. It's a really interesting story. And the same thing, Netta is such a complex character. I'm not sure that she's just dying to leave to be with Silvio. She's dying to leave. You know, she never in Stridano Lassù talks about because of this man.
Right.
Right? And so if we get in touch with who these people really are, I think we end up bringing this production to a place that is honest and fresh and compelling for the audience.
I think you're right. I have found myself, over the years that I have known this opera, I've become more and more sensitized to Netta's plight. I grew up in a world where abuse was more common and sadly more easily accepted by the public at large than it is today. And I think as I've matured, and I'm using that politely in reference to
We've
myself.
all matured.
As I've matured, I've become increasingly aware of the desperation of her situation.
That's right.
She is terrified for her very life.
That's right.
Of this man. And we increasingly see the fruits of that behavior in the newspapers every day when we sit down in the morning and open them up. And there it is. Once again, we've learned nothing. We've made no progress, it seems. But I find that it's helped me to increasingly engage with that character on the stage. Let's talk for a minute about the style and then try to position the mindsets of the audience going to see this performance here in Miami in 1942. The people who were involved in the founding of the opera were largely people that were referred to as snowbirds. They didn't live in Miami year-round. Most of them were well-heeled Easterners who came and spent the ugly winter months down here in lovely Miami, where you could wear short sleeves in January, as you're doing today. Not possible from Buffalo or New York City or Chicago. So here we have a group of well-heeled individuals of means, mostly, who've been to the opera. It's, for most of them, not especially new, but the idea of being able to come here and see and enjoy and experience operatic performances was enticing, and people were very, very excited about it. And I think we also have to understand that in many respects, Miami was a cultural desert in those days. There wasn't a lot of cultural institution. In fact, the founding of the Florida Grand Opera and its continued operation today makes it the oldest cultural institution in the state of Florida.
I did not know that.
There's not one operating cultural institution today that was founded before Florida Grand Opera was in those early 1940 years. Arturo Di Filippi had had a career as a tenor and was fairly well known in a lot of circles. He had some health issues and came to Miami because of those, and in addition, an opportunity to teach voice at the University of Miami. So we had people assembling sort of on an experimental dare to come and see an opera produced right here in Miami. We're going to have an opera company and we're going to want you to support it. And when I first came to Florida Grand Opera over 30 years ago now, there were a bunch of people still around who had vividly could remember that first performance. One of the board members of many, many decades, supporting company, Florence Hecht, represented to me when I first knew her that she was so tiny when she attended as a child that her feet didn't really touch the floor of the chair she sat in for that performance. I did a little research and realized she'd been married about 10 years by that point.
She just had short legs.
She just had short legs. But these people were genuinely moved by the performance. I think it enabled them to make a real commitment to having an opera company here in Miami, supporting it, building it, and it began to make a major and lasting change on the landscape of the whole community. We saw people take courage and inspiration from the fact that Arturo Di Filippi had been able to found something like this and make it work, and why shouldn't we have more culture here? And as people began to spend more of their lives in Miami rather than just coming for the bitterest months of the winter, there was more need and more support. So the opera has been a very, very lasting piece of the cultural landscape here. For the people who did live year-round and raise their families here in Miami, another interesting factor is that The second director of the company, Robert Herman, who had worked for Rudolph Bing at the Metropolitan Opera for many, many years, on De Filippi's retirement, Bob Herman came to run the company, and he forged a partnership with Miami-Dade County Schools. I think they were just called Dade County Schools in those days. They hadn't changed the name of the county yet. But they instituted a program with support from the school board of putting together a brief one-act opera that served as an introduction to the art form for high school students. Sometimes it could be from the standard repertoire. Generally, they were operas that were written for that very purpose, to introduce young people to the art form and to an amplified singing and the possibility of the human voice and all of that excitement. But they built that program up until it actually went into every high school in the county. And if you graduated from high school in Miami, you at one point in your life had been exposed to the opera, either through the in-school program or attending one of the final dress rehearsals at Dade County Auditorium. So we had 2 generations of young people growing up, all of whom had broken down those barriers of, why would I go to the opera? I won't know how to behave. I won't know how to dress. I won't know what's going on. I will be so uncomfortable. Why would I? They'd gotten over that barricade, if you will. They knew what the experience was. And we know when you assemble 500 kids for an experience like that of exposing them to opera, you're not going to make an opera fan out of 500 kids. But there are going to be a few in every audience whose lives will be changed forever by the connection to the art form, who will have that experience of, this is what I've been missing all my life.
Yeah.
How could I be 16 years old and not know that this art form existed and how cool it was?
It's an amazing feeling to be at final dress in the Arts Center at the tech table, and there's a buzz with the curtains about to go up, and I'm still with the lighting designer doing minor tweaks and talking about what we need to look at in this final chance to see the show. And you just feel all of those school kids around you. They're excited to be there. Some of them have never been to an opera before. Some of them don't know classical music well. And you can feel it that they are grabbed right away by this art form, and it's visceral. It's not about telling them they should like opera. They just feel it.
And over the years, I found them to be consistently one of our best audiences.
They're amazing.
The most responsive.
That's right.
1,000 high school kids in that auditorium, and in intense moments of drama, you could hear a pin drop in that auditorium, and you say, not possible. I mean, really? And the kids were so
those
getting it.
rehearsals. And, they react very differently to the show than our normal audiences will. And that's great. If it's a show with comedy in it, you might get a lot more reaction from the kids. If there is intense drama, they might react in certain areas to it that our other audiences might not. And so there's a little bit of, it's a really wonderful, fresh kind of energy that happens in that dress rehearsal with all the school kids. But the most amazing thing is to watch their faces as they walk out at the end of that night. And, we should never lose sight. We have got to keep exposing school kids to this great art form.
That was one of my very greatest rewards. What that meant, though, after going through a couple of generations of kids going through high school being exposed to opera, was that people had overcome all of those natural facets of resistance, and were comfortable going. After they had gone through college, had settled down, married, begun families of their own, for many of them, going to the opera was something that they sought out and enjoyed and wanted to be a part of their lives. And over the 30 years that I worked at Florida Grand Opera, many, many, many times we had representatives from other opera companies coming to see our work for reasons of, interest or cooperation potential and whatnot. And I would stand in the lobby with these people as the audiences were filing in, and consistently they would remark that they had never seen so many young people in an opera audience anywhere in the country. And we became known for that, really, in a way. And I really think that we owe it to the company for making the commitment to that kind of an educational outreach program that really changed the lives of so many people.
Absolutely.
And I can't discount how valuable that is when someone connects with an art form that will continue to challenge them and help them grow in every capacity during the whole course of their lives.
Absolutely.
I'm hard pressed to think of a better investment.
And these are the kind of things, opera, you don't have to be an opera fan per se to have opera really impact you. We all have music that kind of becomes a soundtrack to moments in our lives. Mm-hmm. When we hear a song, we remember a moment in our lives 20, 30 years ago. Opera does the exact same thing to you. Depending on what emotional state it catches you in when you see a Traviata, a Bohème, a Pagliacci, it hits you in a certain way that you will always be taken back to that raw energy by experiencing it. And I think there's something so visceral about this art form, the unamplified voice and what it does to you. We all become almost like the resonance chambers for these singers. Our whole bodies are kind of shimmering with, the energy of their singing. And you go home and you feel that and you take it with you and you never forget it. Opera is an amazing art form.
It is. Let's just, for the sake of individuals who may be seeing this podcast and who have never seen Pagliacci before, just a shell of an outline of the story. It's about a traveling troupe of performers in the back country of Italy who go from village to village, erecting a small portable set that they put up, and they do commedia dell'arte skits for the population, for the people. Canio, the head of this troupe, has picked up a girl, Netta, whom he describes in his great aria, quasi morte de fama. Right. She's almost dead from hunger. Out of the gutter, he gave her a name and gave her a home. And now he fears that she's running off with somebody else.
Yeah.
And her attention has strayed. And he's absolutely crushed and devastated by this.
And he says to her, I at least hoped that if you didn't love me, you would at least show me, you would show me pity.
Mercy, pietà, merce,
For what I've done for you, yeah.
And of course, he's just completely broken. And broken to a point of it becoming really, really frightening, not only for Netta, but for the audience, too. There's a great story from years and years ago. There was a singer at the New England Conservatory who was beginning his professional career after he graduated, and he was singing as a baritone. In those days, he was singing the role of the lover with whom Netta's about to run away with, Silvio. And he was rehearsing in a professional production where the role of Canio was being sung by John Vickers, one of the great Heldon tenors of his generation, and one of the most consuming, incandescent stage actors ever to sing opera.
Absolutely.
And there's a scene where it was staged in a pickup truck that Netta and Silvio have met and are hugged up, and he's trying to convince her to run away with him, and she's terrified they'll get caught and what Canio will do. And Canio's tipped off, and he goes and discovers them in the truck. The way it was staged in this particular production, Canio opens the driver's side door. Silvio's on the passenger side of the front seat. He goes out that door like a rocket, and Canio chases him off the stage. He goes back. Well, this young baritone who was singing the role of Silvio wasn't known for brawn and athleticism and so forth. So he made a pretty graceful exit from the side of the pickup truck and started, angling off stage. And before long, John Vickers was right on top of him. This is the final dress rehearsal. And it was a really awkward moment because he's supposed to chase him off stage, and he caught him.
He got him.
And after they finished the act, John Vickers went to this young singer and said, I have to tell you something, Patrick. When I open that door, you got to run.
You better go.
Because if I catch you, I'm going to have to kill you. From then on, that kid went like a rocket right out of that door. John never had a chance to catch him. But there's all this visceral feeling. The emotions are so staggering, and they really define this period of opera that we refer to as verismo, which means true to life. And there's a great piece that opens the opera. It's a prologue. And curiously enough, I'm going to ask you in a minute about some of the music that you're going to use in addition to Leoncavallo's score. But this is an old tradition of, we love opera, we love singing, we want to hear as much of it as we can. When they were beginning the rehearsals for the first production of Pagliacci, the famous baritone Victor Maurel came. He had just created Iago in Verdi's Macbeth. He would go on to be Verdi's first Falstaff as well. But he came to rehearse in Pagliacci, and his singing was so stunningly impressive that Leoncavallo thought, I don't think he has enough music. We're not going to hear enough of him, and I want to hear more. And he wrote that prologue as a last-minute thought to add on to the piece to give him an opportunity.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Victor Maurel insisted that he add that in there.
Really?
I think so. Victor Maurel was, he had a lot of stature at that time.
Yeah.
And I think he was instrumental in getting Pagliacci produced. And it was called Pagliaccio in its first iteration. And he said, well, I'm going to want it to be called Pagliacci, so that it's not about the character of Canio being Pagliaccio, but it's about all of us, so that he then had stature as well in that title of the piece.
Yeah.
But stories I'll have to check out, but I believe that he was instrumental in getting that first production done.
It wouldn't be the first time that a singer had demanded more music for their role in an opera. But in his prologue, he describes what verismo is, really. He says, you're going to see real people here. Real people who bleed and people who suffer, and you'll hear shouts of derision and you'll hear cries of doom. And he describes basically this new form of opera called verismo. I think in addition to the style of singing, which we'll address in a minute, there's also a big switch in the subject matter. The characters we were used to seeing and watching on the stage were generally from the 1%. Rulers, titled nobility, very wealthy people, or people who were famous in and of their position in one capacity or another. Verismo is about common people.
That's right.
I mean, working class people.
Yeah.
And people who hadn't had roles on the operatic stage before. We didn't see those people unless they were carrying on a plate of food and setting it down and walking off stage as servants. But here we have this new class of people who are the leading characters in the opera, and because they are generally suffering or hugely stimulated by events beyond their control, it required a new method of singing.
Definitely.
And for a lot of people, this was like really, really strange. I mean, most of the trained tenors, when verismo first made its appearance, never sang like a B flat or a high C in what we now call full voice. It was always a very soft, floated sound. And the thought of somebody singing a great big loud B flat like Vincero at the end of Nessun Dorma, that was just an unheard of sound.
Yeah.
And they thought it was ugly, and who would want to hear such a loud, imposing?
There were a lot of unheard of sounds at that time period. The people who helped launch verismo. I mean, if you think about Tita Ruffo, right? You think about Rosa Pansel, these really thick core of sound that they could just carry that core all the way up in balanced register. It's just really
through
beautiful.
The whole staff, yeah.
Really amazing.
It was a new adventure, but it excited people, and they found it really, really thrilling. Much of the music and much of the action in the opera is iconic. For me, one of the exciting things to wait for in a performance of Pagliacci is who's going to get the last line. The last line, after this horrible murder occurs on stage, before an audience on stage of villagers watching this performance, thinking it's so real and it's so good, and not realizing what's occurring before their very eyes. And when they realize, my God, he's killed her, and they were thinking it was an act in a play. The last word is the comedy is over. La commedia è finita. And it wasn't written for Canio, but any tenor worth his salt has enough clout to demand he gets that last role rather than, the baritone. I mean, what baritone ever had rights over a tenor, to take that last role? So it was Caruso himself who, I think, first demanded that they just give him that last line to finish
Those
the
are
opera.
big personalities,
Big floored personalities. But still today, we see people give it,
We always have that open possibility
Tonio,
to decide how we want to handle it.
Right. Tonio sometimes gets the line, and sometimes it's a huge surprise, and often it's given to Canio. But it's always fun to watch for where that's going to go. And
I won't give anything away right now, but what I'll just say is that even just to give it to Tonio, there's so many different ways that he could read that line. After all that he propelled, being this almost Iago-like character, all of the destruction that he caused, he can have a moment of, oh my God, what have I done? Or he can celebrate that and say, I told you I was going to make you pay for this, right? And the same thing happens with Canio. If you give that line to him, there's just such a diverse range of ways that actor can play that line. So, it's not only who does the line, but also how they're going to do the line that I think is also a really rich kind of thing to look for. You mentioned the prologue before and talking about verismo and how what you're going to be seeing on stage is real life. The other thing that really resonates with me in the prologue is that Tonio is really telling the audience, these actors who are playing these roles, we feel real pain. We have real suffering in our lives. And even though we put these masks on for you to perform whatever this scene is that we are compelled to have to play for you, we have our own lives that are causing jealousy, insecurity, rage that are underneath the surface, all of those things. And I think it's just a great reminder that these are real human beings up there, these opera singers who are up there playing these roles of Canio, Nedda, Tonio, that are going through huge dramatic arcs. And that these people, right, these wonderful cast members that we're bringing out, they also have their own lives that are going on, and that we should be aware of that when they're even performing these roles of Canio, Nedda, and Tonio. It's just a reminder of the humanity that lives within the artist behind any role on stage.
Yeah, that's in that wonderful intersection is one of the things that makes live performances.
It's amazing.
So unlike anything else that we witness or partake in or participate in. Tell us a little bit about your concept for handling this piece. Generally, pagliacci is paired with something. It's a funny length. It was famously paired with Mascagni's Cavalleria Rusticana for many years as cav and pag, and it was a double bill you saw all over the world. But as we've progressed and found more and more constraints financially on producing opera and labor contracts like with chorus and with union and so forth, it so happens that generally most people operate within what they call a 3-hour call. And you call your orchestra and they work for you for 3 hours under certain guidelines. And if you go to 3 hours and 15 seconds, you're into overtime. And you pay a full overtime segment of like 15 minutes at time and a half for everybody to pay. So it so happens that the length of pagliacci and the length of Cavalleria Rusticana make your evening a little bit over 3 hours long, which just puts you, in a negative place immediately. And everyone is struggling, especially after the pandemic. People are trying to rebuild audiences, rebuild behavioral patterns of what people do with their time and where they go. And so it's always, a big piece of pressure. But when engaged to direct the production of pagliacci that's going to be the whole evening, you were faced with, a lot of choices to make and a lot of creative opportunities. So tell us a little bit about your approach and what your plans were for this production and how it may be a little bit different from productions other people have seen. Now, there's a lot of tradition for this kind of stuff because, for
Sure.
years in Johann Strauss's Die Fledermaus, Prince Orlovsky has a very, very fancy party, and it's been a tradition that there would be guests announced as they arrived at the party, and often many of those were very famous opera singers who were not appearing in one of the roles in the opera, but would stand and sing an aria from something in a completely different style, from a different period, and you'd have a little bit of a recital in the middle of the show.
Right.
But as I said earlier, we who love opera, we love singing. We want to hear as much of it as possible, and never resent getting to hear something sung by the human voice, which is the thing that really fuels our lives. So you're approaching a whole evening's entertainment with pagliacci, which is shorter than people are often accustomed to. And so tell us about your plans.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'll just say that our action does not stop in order for some kind of recital of music to go on. When I first just started to think through what are the possibilities, now that I have this great opportunity of this standalone production of pagliacci, and by the way, we are not alone in doing that. In 1997, Washington Opera did the Zeffirelli production on its own, standalone, and so I think we're in good company there. But, I just sat with the idea of, okay, if I were going to expand this evening of pagliacci in any way, how might I do that? And the first thing that I thought about was that Leoncavallo, around 6 years before Pagliacci, he wrote a piece called La Nuit de Mai. It's a symphonic poem for tenor and orchestra. When it came time, when he was inspired to write this one-act opera after seeing Mascagni's Cavalleria, he robbed from himself from La Nuit de Mai. He took that opening movement, the 10th movement of La Nuit de Mai, and he made that the opening chorus, Son Quoi, in Pagliacci. And so I was thinking about that, so there's already this connection between those two works. And so what else might there be in La Nuit de Mai that makes sense to live in our pagliacci? So I went back to that piece, and turns out there's quite a wonderful piece of music. It's the opening to La Nuit de Mai, which is in the same key as Vesti la Giubba, has a very similar melodic cadence to it as Vesti la Giubba does, and putting it after the close of Act 1, when Vesti la Giubba finishes, gives us an amazing opportunity to see the relationship between Nedda and Canio, how all of those really complex emotions that they're both dealing with, how they can interact with each other, because we don't get to see that in the straightforward Pagliacci production. So that's the first thing that we're inserting in there. That will close out the first half of the show. But then the other big choice that I made was to embrace Leoncavallo's Neapolitan roots. He was not born in Naples, but he grew up in Naples, and he has a wonderfully famous Neapolitan song called Mattinata. And there is this whole genre of music, vocal music from Naples, Neapolitan songs, which we often hear either singers do with piano on recital, or if we're lucky enough in big solo concerts with orchestra, we'll get to hear them done that way. But we never get to hear them in a theatrical context. And so what I've done is, in the show within the show that these comedians are putting on, I open the show within the show with each of them taking on one of these Neapolitan songs, but they're directly linked to their emotional state of what is going on in this moment in their lives, in this really complex discovery of having a lover and all of that, Nedda's desire to flee. And so the music that we're going to hear that opens the show within the show in Act 2, everybody's going to recognize these tunes. They're so famous. We don't know what they are often, but we know the tunes. They're so familiar. And part of the inspiration for this came for me from last summer when I was in Italy in a very small town. a show came through, one that did exactly what Pagliacci does. It just pops up a stage, they do a performance, and they leave. And one of the things they did was they had this set of songs, and the whole audience there of about 50 people, because I'm telling you, it was a teeny little town, they would just either hum along or clap along, and it just gave you this feel of connection. And I think these Neapolitan songs do exactly that same thing, but at the same time, they're all dramatically driven. And I promise you, this is going to be a story, a telling of this story that nobody's ever experienced before, not because I'm turning Pagliacci on its head, because I'm the last person to do that. I believe in the art form, I believe in what these brilliant composers have done, but that I also believe there's opportunity to add breath and new thought to the way that we produce them. And I'm sure it's going to be an impactful evening.
Well, I'm really looking forward to it, and I think our audiences will be responsive to it as well. It's always so refreshing to see something that surprises you.
Absolutely.
And that takes you by surprise and challenges you to think in a broader way or context about an art form that you've become so comfortable with, like you just cuddle up to something and you know, you're warm and you're happy and you're fuzzy.
And I'll tell you something else, you know,
it's nice
those of us who love opera, we go there and we know what to expect, kind of, right? We know that there's going to be different interpretations of how little things play out, but we kind of know what's waiting for us around the corner. You don't in this production. There's moments here where we get to really bring surprise to the table, and I think it's going to be wonderful for the audience.
I think it'll be terrific, and terrific to have you as a part of Florida Grand Opera. The many, many years that you've been here. You were a young artist.
I was. It's 31 years now.
Yeah, 31 years ago when I first came here, and we knew each other from Boston before.
That's right.
But having you here as a part of the Florida Grand Opera, its long tradition of enriching people's lives here throughout South Florida, I think maybe unique for big American cities, that every student graduating from a public high school has been exposed to opera in a real way. I hate to see us lose that. I hate to see the world change so much that there's no longer a place for those things that did enrich so many lives, certainly mine, certainly yours.
Absolutely.
For so many years.
No, we have to keep that going.
It's been great having a conversation with you.
Thank you,
I'm looking
Justin.
forward to your Pagliacci.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.